Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are fine and safe. This evening, I'm going to talk to you about literature and literary study. And to talk about these, we need to ask these questions. What is literature? What is not literature? What is literary study? Literature has to do with creative art. It refers to all that is artistic. Um, while literary study, you know, um, if not precisely a species of knowledge, then it is if it is not knowledge itself, then it is a species of knowledge, a child of knowledge, a branch of learning. This distinction, um, this distinction is very important, to draw. However, this distinction has been subject to obliteration and erasure. Literature um, as creative art versus literary study as a species of knowledge of learning. Some argue that you cannot understand literature unless you are yourself a writer of literature. You cannot understand novels, for example, unless you are a novel writer yourself. In other words, you need to have this experience, this expertise, to be able to understand the thing in question, like a novel, for example. You should have this creative experience, no doubt. As students, you should have it. But that this creative experience is very important for you as students. Your task is completely different. The task of the novel writer, for example, is to create a fictive universe. But the task of the critic is different. The critic has to critically examine this creative fictional universe. This course is not about teaching you to be novel writers, for example. It's about critiquing novels. It's about teaching you how to critique novels, poems, plays, movies, and art in general. That is to say, it has to do with the examination of the creative experiences, created by artists. Therefore, you should translate your experience of literature into intellectual terms. You should be able to talk about it, not using literary terms like artist, but you should use intellectual terms to speak about this experience. And you should assimilate it to a coherent scheme, enterprise, which must be rational if it is to be knowledge. Remember, we said literary study has to do with knowledge. Therefore, it has to be rational to be called knowledge. Yet, though your literary subject matter might not be irrational, or at least contains elements that are strongly irrational, your analysis of this subject must be rational. There are many irrational literary subject matters because art is irrational, or that is how it works. I guess it works through irrationality. For example, Waiting for Godot is a play compiled by Samuel Beckett. If you read it sounds very irrational. Um, you have two main characters, Vladimir, who looks like a philosopher, who speaks like a philosopher, and you have Estragon, um, who sounds like a fool. The two characters engage in silly conversations. One laughs for no reason at all. The other urinates. You can see this on stage if you go and watch the play. They go hungry, and also they go hungry. Yes, they think of hanging themselves. They wait and wait and wait, and as they wait, you are also waiting. They wait for Godot to arrive because God is somebody who is going to rescue them from the terrible circumstances they are mired in. However, God never shows up. So they sit there waiting next to a lifeless tree. They keep you waiting, nothing actually happens, you feel bored, you feel this is you begin to feel that this is totally irrational. I mean, this display is totally irrational and therefore insignificant. But is it insignificant? That's the question. Um, our analysis of literary works of art, like a play, for example, must be rational to call it knowledge. Um, Yet, to say that our analysis of literary text must be rational, if it is to be knowledge, has produced some problems. Some theorists deny that literary study is knowledge and therefore recommend a second creation, with results which to most of us seem futile today. Because the second creation has usually meant a needless duplication, a second copy, or at most, the translation of one work of art into another, usually inferior. Um, Other theorists argue that literature can't be studied at all. Why? They say you can only read it, you can only enjoy it, you can only appreciate it, and that's it. The problem is one of how intellectually to deal with art, and with literary art in particular. Can this be done? I mean, can this dealing with art intellectually, can this be done? And how can it be done? Critics gave us a number of answers. Let us investigate them to have a better view of what literature is, and of what literary study is, and what literature is not. Um, One answer has been it can be done. I mean, this critical um, dealing with literary works of art can be done um, with the methods developed by the natural sciences, which need only be transferred to the study of literature. Such transfer can be achieved first through the emulation, through the simulation of the general scientific ideals of objectivity, impersonality, and uncertainty. And this is obviously an attempt to support, the collection of neutral data. Second, it can be done through the imitation of the methods of natural science, which is done through the study of causal antecedents and origins. You study causality to collect data. Yet in practice, this genetic method justifies a tracing of any kind of relationship, as long as it is possible on chronological grounds. In the absence of these chronological grounds, you cannot do the study. You cannot do the study simply. Applied more rigidly, scientific causality is used to account for literary phenomena by the assignment of determining causes to economic, social, and political conditions. It can be achieved through using biological concepts in the tracing of the evolution of literature. In other words, scientific causality is short on literary analysis. Today, we all know that this transfer failed to achieve what it was expected to achieve, because sometimes scientific methods have proved their value within a strictly limited area or within a limited technique, such as the use of statistics, in certain methods of textual criticism, or in the study of meter. Most promoters are borrowing scientific methods to analyze text, literary text, confessed failure, confessed fiasco, and ended up with skepticism regarding their efficacy, the efficacy of these methods. Literary scholarship, literary study, has its own valid methods. which are not always those of the natural sciences, but are nevertheless intellectual methods. Long before the rise of modern sciences, long before modern scientific development, philosophy, history, jurisprudence, theology, and even philology had worked out, had developed valid methods of knowing. The Greeks, for example, entertained a solid method of knowing. Andalusian Muslims also developed their own methods of knowing, knowledge. Yet, though their achievements may have become obscured by the theoretical as well as practical triumphs, victories of modern physical sciences, philosophies, histories, theologies, etc., real and permanent values can sometimes, with some modifications, easily be resuscitated or renovated, because these values are premised on what is intellectual. It is true that there is a difference between the methods and aims of the natural sciences and those of the humanities. The scientist accounts for an event in terms of its causal antecedent, while the historian tries to understand its meaning. This process of understanding is necessarily individual and even subjective. The natural scientist aims to establish general laws, while the historian tries to grasp the unique and non-recurring fact, because he is interested not in general facts, but in individual facts. So we need to distinguish, I believe, between the sciences of nature and the sciences of culture. The sciences of culture are interested in the concrete and individual. Individuals, however, can be discovered, can be comprehended only in reference to some scheme of values, which is merely another name for culture, another name of culture. The sciences of nature are occupied with the facts of repetition, and history, which is a science of culture, is occupied with the facts of succession. As students of literature, you need to be aware of these problems, which directly pertain to the discussion of the classification of the sciences, the philosophy of history, and the theory of knowledge. But I think every student of literature should be conscious of the problem of individuality and value. For example, let us ask the following question. Why do we study Shakespeare? We study Shakespeare not because we are primarily interested in what he has in common with all other men. For we could then be interested in any other man. We study Shakespeare not because we are interested in what he shares with all Englishmen, all Elizabethans, all poets, all dramatists, or even all Elizabethan dramatists. Because if we do, we might just study Thomas Digger, Thomas Heywood, or Ben Jonson. We study Shakespeare not because of these reasons, but because we rather want to discover what is peculiarly Shakespeare's, what makes Shakespeare Shakespeare. And this is obviously a problem of individuality and value. Even in studying a period or movement like the Romantic movement, the modern movement, the postmodern movement, or what specific national literature, the literary student will be interested in it as an individuality with characteristic features and qualities which set it off from other similar groupings, similar periods and movements. What makes it different? What makes it unique? The individuality problem should be revered when approaching literature, because those attempts that aim at finding general laws in literature have always failed. These laws, natural laws, are either trivial or are either trivial or false. They do not tell us anything really significant about the processes of literature. So they could be judged trivial or false. Therefore, we shouldn't apply them. If physics, for example, may see its highest victories, its highest triumphs in some general theory, reducing to a formula electricity and heat, gravitation and light, no general law can be assumed to achieve the purpose of the literary study. The more general, the more abstract, and therefore empty it will seem. But to stress the individuality and uniqueness of every work of art, though as a reaction against facile generalizations, is to forget that no work of art can be wholly unique, since it will then be completely incomprehensible. It is of course true that there is only one Hamlet, one Volpone, but even a rubbish heap is unique in the sense that it's a great, or it's a precise proportions, its possession, its chemical combinations, its smell, its colors, cannot be duplicated exactly. It's unique. Moreover, all words in every literary work of art are by their very nature generals and not particulars. The quarrel between the universal and the particular in literature has been going on since Aristotle proclaimed poetry to be more universal and hence more philosophical than history, which is concerned only with the particular. The Romantics and most modern critics never tire of stressing the particularity of poetry, its texture, its correctness. But we should recognize that each work of literature is both general and particular, or better possibly, is both individual and general. Otherwise, it would be completely comprehensible. Individuality can be distinguished from complete particularity and uniqueness. Like every human being, each work of literature has its individual qualities, characteristics, but it also shares common properties with other works of art, just as every man, every human being shares traits, characteristics with humanity, but all members of his sex, nation, class, profession, etc. Literary criticism and literary history both attempt to characterize the individuality of a work, of an author, of a period, or of a national literature, but this characterization can be accomplished, can be done only in universal terms, on the basis of a literary theory. Literary theory, which is an organon of methods, a body of methods, is a great need of literary scholarship today. So by limiting the understanding of literature to such an organon of methods, to such a body of methods, we do not of course mean to minimize the importance of sympathetic understanding and enjoyment as preconditions of our knowledge and hence our reflections upon literature, but they are only preconditions. To say that literary study serves only the art of reading is to misconceive the ideal of organized knowledge, however indispensable this art may be to the student of literature. Even though reading be used broadly enough to include critical understanding, can be used broadly enough to include critical understanding and sensibility, the art of reading is an ideal for a purely personal cultivation. It cannot, however, replace the conception of literary scholarship, conceived of a conceived of as a super personal tradition, as a growing body of knowledge, insights, and judgments. So let me summarize what I have just said. You need to understand that literature is creative, it is an art. But literary study, if not precisely a species of science, is a species of knowledge or learning. I mean, if it is not knowledge, it's a child of knowledge. The application of natural laws to literature has proved itself as either futile or false. And as students of literature, you should translate your experience of literature into intellectual terms and put it, I mean, you put this experience into a coherent scheme which must be rational to be considered knowledge. And since literature is both general and particular, it should be studied in universal terms, which literary criticism and literary history offer. Thank you very much for your attention.